Our speaker tonight is Dr. Belinda Calabia. Dr. Calabia is a professional life coach and mentor trained at the Professional Christian Coach Institute and the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Formerly the president of the RTB Portland chapter, she also holds an advanced certification in science apologetics from the Regents Institute. A retired internal medicine physician, she earned her medical degree from the University of Toledo Medical School, formerly the Medical College of Ohio, and completed her residency at Providence Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Belinda Calabia.
Hello from Oregon, and from our new ministry here in Oregon, Apologia for Truth and Hope. Joseph Shelton, who's an associate RTB scholar, and I launched this ministry in September, supported by our church, Park Place Church. I'm thankful for the opportunity to present on the topic of abortion. My goal is that you will gain new awareness and takeaways that will boost your confidence to engage in authentic, grace-filled, and respectful conversations with people in your circle of influence. The first part of my presentation draws from the Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture. That's the second edition by Scott Klusendorf. He's the president of Life Training Institute, which trains pro-life advocates to persuasively defend their views. I will review their approach to what is pro-life, the pro-life argument, both the scientific and philosophical support, questions such as what is the unborn, what is abortion, worldviews undergirding the abortion perspectives. The second part of my presentation draws from the Equal Rights Institute, whose mission is to equip pro-life advocates to think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively about abortion. ERI offers great resources, including blogs, videos, podcasts, and courses that teach relational dialogue, and they work on the strongest current pro-life arguments. I highly recommend ERI, especially for addressing cases where pro-choice advocates concede that the unborn are human and have a right to life, yet they still support abortion. Since May, I've discovered these additional arguments. This diagram represents my overview of those argument categories. In the past month, we held 2 successful 90-minute apologetics group coaching workshops for the new Apologia for Truth and Hope ministry on this topic. In the interest of time, I'll just touch on a few of these arguments tonight. I plan to provide a big picture view and then will recommend resources for the arguments I can't cover tonight. Okay, let's begin. So what is pro-life? Being pro-life means you oppose the intentional killing of innocent human beings in the womb. Be careful not to fall for the whole life. Whole life advocates insist that pro-life mean more than focusing on the unborn and the issue of abortion. They change pro-life to mean whole life from the womb to the tomb. This is a distraction. Imagine saying to the American Cancer Society, if you were truly against disease, you'd fight other illnesses as vigorously, as passionately, and as loudly as you do cancer. Pro-life pursues 4 operational objectives. All are important objectives: advocating for the unborn legally, present alternatives to abortion like the pregnancy resource centers, minister to the millions wounded by abortion by presenting the gospel of Jesus Christ as the only hope for human evil, and engage the culture with a persuasive case for life focused on the humanity of the unborn and the inhumanity of abortion. We'll be focusing on number 4. In your pro-life conversations, don't fall for distractions. Keep the main thing the main thing. So what is the main thing? Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. A syllogism is a form of deductive reasoning to formally state your argument. Important. An argument in logic does not mean a verbal fight, a bitter controversy, a heated disagreement, or a debate. A syllogism is an argument consisting of exactly two premises and one conclusion. The premises are the statements that provide support, facts, evidence, and reasons. Premises are either true or false. Our goal is to show that the premises are true. If they are true, then the conclusion is certainly true. A sound deductive argument occurs when all the premises are true and there is a valid argument. A valid argument occurs when the conclusion does, in fact, follow with certainty from the premises. The conclusion of a sound deductive argument is certainly true. So premise one in the pro-life argument is, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise two, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, abortion is morally wrong. So here is the pro-life argument. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Abortion is morally wrong. We will use the science of embryology and philosophy to defend the pro-life argument. The science of embryology. From the earliest stage of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. Philosophy. There is no essential difference between the embryo you once were and the person you are today, such that it would justify killing you at that earlier stage of development. So the question, should we kill the unborn? Before we can answer that question, we need to answer this key question. What is the unborn? In your pro-life conversations, keep in your mind the pro-life syllogism and this key question. What is the unborn? Don't fall for distractions. Keep the main thing the main thing. Let's begin by exploring the evidence for what is the unborn. The science of embryology establishes a set of facts. In the embryology textbook, The Developing Human, Clinically Oriented Embryology, Keith Moore states, human development begins at fertilization, when the sperm unites with an ovum to form a unicellular organism called a zygote. This highly specialized totipotent cell, capable of giving rise to any cell type, marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. I went to my medical school textbooks and I found my copy. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but it's 40 years ago and it's the same statement in there. So I thought that was pretty cool. Embryologists O'Rahilly and Mueller state, although life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is thereby formed. T.W. Sadler states in Langman's embryology book, the development of a human begins with fertilization, a process by which the spermatozoon from the male and the oocyte from the female unite to give rise to a new organism, the zygote. My embryology textbook illustrates how human development begins at fertilization. The sperm from the male unites with an ovum from the female. The parent's DNA combine, forming a new organism, the zygote, a unicellular, genetically distinct organism. Fertilization marks the beginning of each of us as a unique whole human being. So scientifically, what is the unborn? The zygote, later called the embryo, is distinct. It is different in kind from any cell of its parents. It has its own unique chromosomal structure. It also directs its own internal development. The embryo is alive. Scientists generally agree that anything that exhibits irritability, reaction to stimuli, metabolism, converting food to energy, and cellular reproduction, growth, is considered alive. Not only does the embryo exhibit all these things, it develops itself in ways conducive to its own survival and maturation. Here is a depiction of the debate by Cyanide and Happiness at explosum.net. It's alive, it's alive, it's alive, it's alive. It's debatable. The embryo is a whole human organism, not part of another living entity like clumps of skin cells. It is already a whole human being, an immature human, but still a whole human. An acorn is not a tree, and an embryo is not an adult. Different stages of life, same organisms. Secular Pro-Life is an organization that advances secular arguments against abortion. It is a space for atheists, agnostics, and other secularists interested in anti-abortion work. This one was one of their top 10 graphics of 2023. I highly recommend them as a pro-life resource. To state it simply, you didn't come from an embryo. You once were an embryo. The science of embryology confirms the humanity of the unborn. From the earliest stages of development, you were distinct, you were living, you were whole. Remember these words: distinct, living, and whole. So what is the unborn? The unborn is a human being. Applied to the pro-life argument, the science of embryology supports the truth of premises 1 and 2. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. When I saw this pregnant woman with "not yet a human" written on her 3rd trimester belly, I wondered how I could engage her. I trust God will provide opportunities for all of us to share what we are learning tonight in meaningful conversations. What is abortion? I will present some photos, actually, from a 50 seconds video clip that did not work on my Zoom, my PowerPoint. So these will contain abortion imagery. I am aware that some pro-life advocates misuse these images, springing them on unsuspecting audiences with no context, no warning, or permission. I will tell you exactly what is on these photos so you can avert your gaze if you want. You do not need to look at these photos or leave the Zoom because there will be no narration. If you decide to watch, you won't see an abortion performed, but you will see the aftermath of a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd trimester procedure. I warn you, it is graphic and disturbing. You have the freedom to look away. These photos are not meant to shock, but rather to educate and inspire further dialogue in the quest for truth. Visuals carefully used can reawaken moral intuitions. Secondly, I recognize that for some in this gathering, it took great courage to be here. The topic of abortion is not abstract to you. You have experienced abortion in some way, possibly as a guy or a parent who encouraged someone to have an abortion, or you are a girl or woman who made that choice. I am not here to condemn you because I am a firm believer in the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of Jesus puts every one of us on equal footing at the bar of God's justice. The gospel is the story of a good God creating a good world, but we rebelled against him. God had every right to wipe out the human race for our rebellion, giving us exactly what we deserve. But instead, God sent Jesus, the sinless one, to bear in full his judgment against sin. If you have had an experience with abortion, you do not need an excuse. You need what everybody in this Zoom call needs: forgiveness. Anyone who puts their trust completely in Jesus for salvation are completely forgiven. And that is very, very good news. It gets even better because the gospel is not just about forgiveness, it's about adoption. God the Father lovingly adopts those who completely trust in Jesus alone for their salvation. God adopts them into his family as dearly beloved children. For some of you today, this may be your adoption day into God's family. If so, you are on the road to healing, to the healing that God can bring. With that good news in mind, I will go ahead and click to the next 3 slides, and I'll remain silent. And then when those slides are through, I'll let you know. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. The forgiveness for the shedding of innocent blood requires the shedding of innocent blood, meaning the atonement of Jesus is where we find the forgiveness for the shedding of innocent blood. So, what is abortion? Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent preborn human being. Words are important. The key word here is intentional. Abortion is the intentional use of any drug, device, or procedure to ensure the death of the preborn human being before, during, or in the process of separation of the mother and her embryo or fetus. Abortion is intentional feticide. Applied to the pro-life argument, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Premise 1 and premise 2 are true. Therefore, it follows that the conclusion, abortion is morally wrong, is certainly true. What justifies killing the unborn? What makes humans valuable? What makes humans equal? When does a human have a right to life and therefore protection from violence? Philosophically, there is no fundamental difference between you as an embryo and you as an adult that would justify intentionally killing you at that earlier stage of development. And that just is a reminder about that. Stephen Schwartz suggests the acronym SLED as a helpful reminder of 4 non-essential differences: differences in size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependence are not good reasons to claim you had no right to life before birth, but do now. Size. You were smaller as an embryo. How does size determine value? Males tend to be larger than females. Are males more valuable? level of development. You were less developed as an embryo, but preteens are less developed than adults physically and mentally. Do you think they have less value? Of course not. Environment. Where you are has no bearing on what you are. I am in Oregon. If I flew to San Jose, how would my value change upon arriving there? How does an 8-inch journey through the birth canal change the essential value of the unborn? In short, humans are equal by nature, not by function. We differ immensely in our respective degrees, but we're nonetheless equal because we share a common human nature. We had that human nature from the moment we began to exist. So in regards to these questions, what justifies killing the unborn? What makes humans valuable? What makes humans equal? When does a human have a right to life and therefore protection from violence? When you hear answers to these questions, you must be aware of the worldview, the worldview, the worldview. Based on your worldview, the worldview of the people in your circle, and the culture, abortion conversations will be won or lost. You don't have to agree, but knowledge leading to understanding is an important step to conversations. Understanding different worldviews will help you gain insight into others, allowing you to engage with wisdom and grace in your conversations. The major worldviews influence the abortion debate are philosophical naturalism, postmodernism, critical theory, theism. As apologists, I assume all of you are familiar with these worldviews. In the interest of time, I will focus on how these worldviews impact perspectives on abortion. Philosophical naturalism holds that only the natural world exists and that all phenomena can be expanded by natural causes without appeal to the supernatural. Human beings are strictly physical, the product of blind evolutionary forces. Human beings are cosmic accidents, just physical matter and functional characteristics. If humans, like every other living thing, are mere cosmic accidents, then they have no intrinsic purposes, no intrinsic value, and no fundamental dignity at any stage of development. So how can philosophical naturalism manifest in someone's abortion perspective? According to feminist Katha Pollitt, vacuuming out your womb is morally no different than vacuuming out your house. Postmodernism is skeptical of universal truths, objective moral standards, and dominant narratives. It emphasizes that individual experiences, social contexts, and power dynamics shape our understanding of reality, often rejecting rigid categories like right and wrong. A human fetus has no intrinsic value. Perspective of the fetus is socially constructed like everything else. The mother is at liberty to determine her offspring's value according to her own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and the mystery of human life. Her thinking that a fetus has value is what gives him, the fetus, value. Thus, you'll hear the same mother describe an unwanted pregnancy as an unwelcome intrusion and a wanted pregnancy as giving her life new meaning. Her offspring's value is determined strictly by her perception of him. As for judging abortion to be right or wrong, that's impossible because no one has privileged access to what's real. Critical theory focuses on understanding and challenging power structures, particularly those related to oppression, inequality, and domination. It often emphasizes issues of race, gender, class, and other social dynamics, and seeks to empower marginalized groups. The argument for abortion based on critical theory goes like this. Our primary ethical duty is to liberate oppressed groups from their oppressors. Abortion liberates oppressed groups from their oppressors, freeing women in particular from patriarchal domination. Thus, a just society must protect abortion rights. It would be oppressive not to. Critical theory can undergird perspectives in abortion by emphasizing that laws restricting abortion are often tools of oppression, especially against women and marginalized communities. Abortion can be seen as a fight against oppressive structures that aim to control women's reproductive choices. Forcing someone to continue a pregnancy can be an expression of institutional power and control over marginalized bodies. In theism, truth and human value are grounded in the character of a holy God and can be known objectively. Decision-making is driven by objective moral truths grounded in the Creator. Applied to abortion, theism says that all humans, regardless of size, level of development, location, skin color, or gender, have intrinsic value because they bear the image of God. Because they bear the image of God, the shedding of innocent blood, the intentional killing of innocent human beings is strictly forbidden. Abortion is the shedding of innocent blood. Therefore, abortion is immoral. I will now transition to the second part of my presentation, which draws from the Equal Rights Institute. There are other pro-choice advocates who actually concede the unborn are human and have the right to life, but they still advocate for abortion. There are two main groups of arguments. Personhood arguments. The unborn are not persons, therefore abortion is permissible. Bodily rights arguments. Even if the unborn are human and are persons with the right to life, abortion is still permissible. These bodily rights fall into two categories. First, I think we're gonna say, the pro-life argument against the personhood argument is the equal rights argument. Now back to those two categories for bodily rights. Is the sovereign zone and the right to refuse. Now, right to refuse has, okay, sovereign zone. The argument against sovereign zone is extreme cases of bodily autonomy. And then back to right to failure, right to refuse has two arguments to it. Responsibility to help, I think also called obligation to help, and then obligation to not intentionally kill an innocent human being. So there's three overarching pro-choice justifications for abortion. One, assuming the unborn is not human, which we discussed on the first half, arguing that the unborn is not a human person, so that'll be the personhood arguments, and then conceding the unborn is human and a person, and still say that the woman can kill the unborn because of her bodily rights. I'm going to go down the bodily autonomy, my body, my choice route. Timothy Brahm of ERI states, "My body, my choice is possibly the most common slogan in defense of abortion rights now, and an embarrassing number of pro-life people completely misunderstand it." He prompts us to ask, to what is, in quotes, my body, referring in the my body, my choice slogan? Pro-life people far too often incorrectly assume that it is the body of the unborn. There is almost never That is almost never what pro-choice people mean. The pro-choice advocate means the parts of the woman's body that are affected by pregnancy, such as her uterus, vagina, ovaries, etc. Those are indisputably her body parts, and pregnancy affects them. Okay, the pro-life mind is naturally inclined to focus on the unborn, and understandably so. They are being killed daily by the thousands. Almost nothing justifies killing a human person. But to most pro-choice people, even if the unborn is a human person, women have the right to kill the unborn if they are inside her body. This is the bodily rights view. Shouting that the unborn is a human being does nothing to respond to the bodily rights view. Absolutely nothing. Referring to the pro-life argument, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Abortion is morally wrong. Timothy Braun states, when pro-life people hear my body, my choice, far too many assume that the pro-choice person is denying premise 2, when in fact they are denying premise 1. They're denying it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. The pro-choice advocates aren't saying that the unborn isn't a human person. They are saying that the woman is justified in killing him because he is in her body. Brahm implores pro-life advocates. If a pro-choice person says, my body, my choice, never, ever, ever respond by saying, but the baby has its own body, or, but the baby is a human being. Instead, ask a clarification question to find out if they are advocating the bodily rights view or the what he calls scientifically ignorant view. He says, I want to make sure I understand what you mean, and I've heard people use that phrase in different ways, so help me out. Do you mean that the embryo's body is literally just part of the mother's body, like a kidney or an organ? Or do you mean that because the embryo is in her body, that she has the right to kill it? He says he has asked some variation of this clarification question literally hundreds of times. At least 95% of the time, the pro-choice person has had a bodily rights view. He also recommends, or says to us, pro-life advocates do not share this straw man meme. It says, for the logic impaired, and it has a picture of her body and then pointing to someone else's body, stating, not your body, not your choice. Abortion is murder. There are two major problems with this meme. First, it strawmans the pro-choice view. This is a logic problem, as I explained earlier. Second, it is derisive toward the pro-choice view. It fails to understand them or their perspective. This is a tone problem and disrespectful. Now, I want you to note, though, that the pro-life people are not saying that women shouldn't have control over their bodies. Of course they should, but bodily autonomy isn't exclusively a pro-choice concept. We agree that bodily autonomy exists and that it is a huge violation if a person's dignity when this right is breached. We just don't think that the right to one's bodily autonomy includes the right to intentionally kill an innocent person, and we have good reasons for that. There are two categories of the bodily rights argument, the sovereign zone and the right to refuse. The sovereign zone argument states that even if the unborn is a human being, a woman should still be able to have an abortion because she has the right to do anything she wants with anything inside the sovereign zone of her body. Most pro-choice people want some restrictions or regulations on abortion. So in this type of dialogue, you can start trying to find some common ground by sharing situations that most people disagree with, like late-term abortions, or having an abortion because, oh, my ultrasound showed that I have a boy and I want a girl. So sex selection. And then abortion just as an art project. And believe it or not, there was somebody that did that. Another one might be mother doesn't want a scar from a C-section. Sadly, that also happened. So, but if these don't work, where, so if they say that they should have total bodily autonomy, then that means that they should have total bodily autonomy even in the third trimester, that they should go ahead and have a late-term abortion, that's okay based on bodily autonomy. But if that doesn't work, there are aggressive analogies. And this is a thought experiment. We're not saying that anybody does this kind of thing, but it's the thalidomide analogy. Thalidomide is a drug that was given to pregnant women decades ago to help prevent morning sickness. The doctors administered the drug and quickly learned that it had the side effect of causing severe birth defects. The children were almost always born without limbs. Thus, thalidomide is no longer used to prevent morning sickness. However, for the sake of our analogy, say a woman wants to take the drug anyway, even though she knows it will cause deformity. Should she be allowed to do that? If someone supports abortion on the grounds that the woman's body is a type of sovereign zone where she may do whatever she wants with no regard to the other person inside of her, then that person must also support the use of thalidomide if the woman so chooses. So one of the questions he has here is like, why should a woman have the right to dismember a child if she shouldn't have the right to deform him? Why is it okay for her to have a doctor rip her child's limbs off with a suction machine or with forceps, but it is not okay for her to take a drug that causes her child to not grow limbs? Again, that's just a thought experiment. Now, the right to refuse arguments state that even if the unborn is a human being with a right to life, a woman has a right to refuse to allow the unborn the use of her body. The right to refuse argument from Judith Jarvis Thompson defends the right to abortion based on bodily autonomy, even if they concede the fetus is a human and a person with a right to life. She uses this famous analogy. Imagine you wake up connected to an unconscious violinist who needs your body for 9 months to survive. While the violinist has a right to life, you aren't morally obligated to stay connected. Thompson argues the same applies to pregnancy. A woman should have the right to unplug from the fetus because it's her body. This isn't about killing the fetus, but refusing to provide life support, which is different, they say. Just as you can refuse to sustain the violinist, a woman has a right to refuse the use of her body, even if it results in the fetus's death. This argument highlights bodily autonomy again, the right to control what happens to your own body, even when it impacts someone else's survival. The obligation to not intentionally kill an innocent human being argument focuses on the distinction between not helping someone and directly killing them. According to Josh Brahm from ERI, there are two options in pregnancy. You can either help by carrying the pregnancy to term, or at least until the fetus is viable, or you can directly kill the fetal person through an abortion. In pregnancy, the option just to not help does not exist. The main problems with the famous violinist thought experiment is it pretends that abortion is merely unplugging from a sick person or choosing not to help them. That is not how abortion works. It directly kills a healthy person. When you unplug from a sick person, you are merely, in quotes, refusing to help them. In other words, you are keeping them in their original state, which in this case would be their original state is that they're dying. Abortion is not the refusal of assistance to a sick person. It's the killing of a healthy person. The obligation not to kill, the obligation not to intentionally kill an innocent human being argument takes us back to the pro-life syllogism premise 1. I think I wrote premise 2, but I meant premise 1. ERI advocates that the details matter because it's not just a matter of unplugging or not helping. So abortion procedures. In the earliest stages of pregnancy, the woman ingests a drug to separate the embryo from the placenta, which is how he gets his oxygen. After he suffocates, she takes a second pill to cause cramping and to expel the now dead embryo. Once the embryo is too big for the woman to safely have a chemical abortion, the abortion practitioner uses suction or forceps to dismember the fetus. If the fetus is too big for a dismemberment abortion, he is first given a shot of digoxin to stop his heart, and then the woman gives birth to a dead baby. What happens in an abortion is indisputably direct killing. ERI concludes we should have a legal obligation to not directly kill innocent human beings. So there are the other arguments with personhood. We didn't go over that. The equal rights argument is really strong. In fact, Josh from ERI says that when they use that in college settings, that has really affected a lot of people, and they've either changed their mind or they've really thought about their pro-choice status. And then I also did not cover responsibility to help. But I will provide Kirby with this information. This podcast from STR and ERI Josh Brahm, responding to my body, my choice, also goes over sovereign and also equal rights. And that's an excellent podcast, YouTube. And then ERI also did an 8-minute one on all people have rights. And that one's actually really cool. It gives you a really good idea of who belongs in the circle of protection and equal rights. And then this one to the right is this young lady doing the equal rights argument with this gentleman here, and how that went. And that's what I have for you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Well, so one, I had sort of two questions, and they're
Yes.
really more about, sort of the context for the discussion. And like, if I sort of just think in the course of my life, and if I go back 20 or 30 years ago, the way we're sort of approaching the subject is kind of the way I've traditionally thought of it, as a moral choice that's right or wrong, and what do people do and so forth. What's interesting in sort of today's political discourse is you hear more and more things about say, a woman has a late term pregnancy, maybe who wants to have a child, and the fetus is dying, or there's, it's not a situation of wanting to kill someone. It's more like a fireman going into a building that's burning, and they can save one life or the other, but not both.
Mhm.
And so I'm sort of interested in how all of that has sort of gotten into the discussion of abortion, because it seems it's just a very new sort of twist, and also things like in vitro, and that's something where I think these arguments sort of apply, but it's in a very, very abstract case, and something where um, so anyway, there's a lot of so I'm curious about just why as a society we're getting into all these other areas, or what do we think is happening there. So that's one question. And then a second completely different question is if you look at the demographics of the US and the world, we're right now below replacement rate, and just the fertility rates are dropping, and there's a growing segment of people in their 20s and 30s, a larger and larger percentage, who say, I'm just not interested in having children, period, sort of for convenience. And how does that mindset sort of relate to the discussion of pro-life? And is there an argument or kind of a persuasion that could be used there, that kind of esteems life but within that context?
Expound more on that last question. I was
Yeah, so
yeah.
there's been a lot of articles and just data in the press where they measure the fertility rate of a population of women in every country. So over the course of a
Mhm.
person's life, do they have 0 children, or 1 or 2 or 3, and once in a society you get below a replacement rate, basically it means the population is gonna shrink, and everyone's gonna age. And you've seen that
Mhm.
happen in Japan, you've seen that happen in China because of the one child policy, and in the US and Europe, the numbers are all pointing in that direction. And part of the argument there is that that sort of the economics of having a child is tougher today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And so
Mhm.
a greater and greater portion of the population is just choosing not to. So they're saying, I'll be a dual income, no child family, or something like that. So
Are you
and
asking how?
so that sort of relates to just the moral,
Mhm.
like what do you say to someone who is pregnant, who has an opportunity to regenerate society? And is there a discussion that kind of links those two realities?
Well, if I'm understanding right, I think that you're asking, like, how can we encourage the younger people to start having babies?
Well, yeah,
Kind of,
partly, but
like,
also is the
that
fact that
it is
society is
actually
shrinking.
wonderful to be to be a parent, to be family, to kind of
Yeah,
grow
but
in
also the
that
fact
way.
that society is shrinking and actually really needs babies. How does that relate, or how does that how do you use that in
Oh,
a
Randy.
discourse to someone who has an opportunity to have a baby?
Yeah. Randy, you have the philosophy stuff. I saw you kind of smiling about that.
Oh no, I just thought it was
I'd
funny.
love to hear what your
Young
answer
kids,
is.
I don't think you're going to have any problems with young kids wanting to try to have babies.
What's that?
Never mind. Never mind. Disregard. It's. I just thought it was funny. Never mind.
Okay. Well, and then I'm sorry. Do you go by Jay
Or just
Randolph?
Randy?
Okay. So I'm not sure. I didn't read any of those kind of articles in regards to like population, like
Okay.
increasing and such like that. And it sort of, sounds to me kind of like a worldview question, like
Well, it's
how.
actually a demographic question. It's very, very measurable. Yeah.
And I think the actual number is, they say, is 2.1. That if the average family is having less than 2.1 children in any country, they're losing population over the long run. So it's that, and that's the average number of children that a couple would have. So Above 2.1, you are not shrinking. Below 2.1, you are shrinking.
Yeah, but in the US though, the numbers are
We're
heading
we're
down.
1.67, I think, is the last
Yeah.
number that I heard.
And it's a big change in the last decade. So there's something that's going on there, you
Yeah.
know.
Well,
Well,
and
I think
Europe is the same way.
Yeah, in
Europe's
Europe
the
as
same
well.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think fertility rates are related to the industrialization of society. In an agrarian society, you have more kids, more space because the kids are helping out on the farms.
Mhm.
Industrial society, um, kids are costs, so you have to educate them, buy them clothes, and that kind of thing. So as societies move into a more industrialized setting, you'll see dropping birth rates, and I think there's a correlation with the industrialization, of different countries. If you look at different rates.
Yeah.
But I think
Good answer.
no one is gonna have kids just to help the population rate.
So, Mark, have you got a question that you'd like to ask?
Yeah. So again, I thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was really good, and I love the fact that you really focused in on the bodily autonomy piece. And in my experience with that, and it's just a little bit, I've had a few engagements on that. One question I had in the violin example,
Yeah.
the violinist example. It's also I've heard it with the kidney donor, right? If I
Right.
don't donate my kidney, they will die. And one of the counter arguments that you put in there is about the fact that the fetus, the difference is the fetus is healthy, whereas the sick person is not. But that's not the way the other person took it, because remove the fetus from mom and the fetus dies. So the fetus is unable, until it's, reaches a certain point of maturity, is unable to survive on its own. So I guess you could counter argue that with say, well, no, the fetus is not healthy either, because without the mom's body, and that was the argument of the person, the fetus will die. Similar, the donor without my kidney will die. So what's the difference? And I tried pushing on that various ways, but
Yeah, Mark. I would have to be honest, this philosophy and like these thought experiments and all these different
right.
permutations of it is just like, whoa. It's kind of like it strains my brain some. But what I understood is that that the fetus is healthy. Like like normally there's nothing wrong with it. Whereas the other person has some kind of illness in this kind of situation, whether or not it's like because their kidneys are failing, or what was some of the other, I can't remember what other types, but there was always something where that person was ill, and you could have that. I think it was this obligation. You could do the obligation to help, but you weren't required to do it. You didn't have to legislate that you would be forced to like donate your kidney to somebody. I think that's how I kind of took it, is that you're not wanting to legislate, forcing you to either give blood donation or kidney to somebody.
Right. Yeah, I know. Just the argument of this one person was, well, you're forcing me to give my body for 9 months.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's yeah, do you
My understanding,
that's the argument that I ended up like pointing out what ERI said about
yeah, my understanding with
not intentionally killing.
violinist, my understanding with the violinist argument, kind of a weakness with that as well, is that as opposed to kind of the idea is trying to show that there's an external person that's kind of invading your space. But if you look at the newborn, right, or the unborn, and they're inhabiting the womb, the purpose of the womb is expressly for this child, and so therefore the parallel that the violinist argument is hoping to make, really falls apart.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the fact that it's such like in a kidney donor, um, there isn't necessarily just a single kidney donor. There's potentially somebody else that can offer it.
Mhm.
Now,
I think
doesn't
I
mean like
think
you
though
just go
when I
down to
was
the corner
looking at
store
it,
and get a kidney.
they
But-
do the thought experiment where you are the only person. Like,
right,
yeah, they create it that way.
right, right.
John, did you have another question?
Yeah, so I had I know one objection that I understand. Sometimes, Exodus, I think 21 is pulled in, but it's the one really about it's basically the viability argument. And so basically, this would be part of the group that, I think would largely be against abortion. But maybe the definition of the cleft being once prior to the unborn, the fetus being viable, abortion's okay, and subsequent to it, not being okay. And I'm just curious, I really love your mind map. And so not being as familiar with it yet, I'm just curious how this particular objection, the viability objection, would map onto
Mm.
kind of this system, and then perhaps
Mhm.
and how we can kind of reason through kind of the counter to that, or
So
at
I
least
guess
a thought.
with what I understand with the viability is that that there's just a certain stage, right, where the fetus is potentially viable, and it keeps getting younger and younger. I think now it's around 22 to 23 weeks of viability. Is your question? So I think that uh, the argument for abortion doesn't depend, like it wouldn't be at any point, because it would have to be if you define it, you being human at the point of fertilization, then you wouldn't do an abortion at
Right.
that
No,
point.
no,
Is that
understood.
what your question is?
Yep. No, no, I totally agree with you that I think for these objectors, I
Hmm.
don't think they would probably not agree with that.
Oh, maybe
With
it's the
that. So
personhood.
to them, you know what, that may be it, as because I think for them the 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 personhood is probably the same thing as viability, which is the same thing as being a human. And so whatever that point is, prior to that, they're less than that. And therefore, in their mind, abortion is permissible. But once this cleft is breached, then the person is now should be protected. I think you're right. Maybe that falls under a
I
category
think
of
it might be personhood, um, because there are different uh, different philosophers who like Peter's Peter Singer,
Yeah.
some of the others, I can't remember what their names are, but basically they say that you have to have a certain cognitive state
right.
before you're considered a person. And so if you haven't reached that state, wherever they've defined it as, okay, like I think one of them is like over time that you're aware over time.
That doesn't hold. That doesn't hold either.
Exactly. That falls under the whole SLED argument, right? They're basically ancillary characteristics. And so if you can talk about an older person that's no longer self-aware with dementia, yeah, I totally agree.
Or you
It's
just
not a good.
or just having someone who's had brain damage, or having someone who's mentally, I don't want to say, I don't know what the correct political term is, but mentally retarded is what we used to, you wouldn't kill somebody like that
Exactly.
because they cannot. Yeah. So no, that's.
So yeah, that's the personhood arguments, and that we're equal based on what our human nature that we have, that we all share.
And that's a key point. That's a really a key point. Is the thing is, there's so much more interesting arguments around what it means to be human and what it means to be alive, and there are a lot of interesting, viewpoints in that arena with regard to this argument. It's not
Yeah.
just a basic argument.
Yeah,
Well,
no, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the personhood arguments were very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I was going to ask something about that, Belinda, if I could.
Mhm.
Have you come across any discussions of the differences between being human and being a person, or humanity and personhood? As I'm vaguely remembering
Yeah, I think that's actually what we're talking about. That so
Yeah.
these guys recognize that the fetus is human,
Yep.
but they're not a person yet, based on certain cognitive stages, I think that they've described. So I should know this, but let's just say that there's certain different cognitive stages, okay? And that they have to demonstrate that. And so some will say that that doesn't occur until 6 weeks or 20 weeks. Peter Singer, his definition, actually, if we use that definition, and he says this too, is that newborns would also not qualify to be a person, and so therefore can be killed.
I'm vaguely remembering a Christian thinker, really deep Christian thinker and writer from years ago, who I think he was taking the view that personhood is a spectrum, a development, rather than a binary thing. You either are not a person or you are a person. And so he was saying it's something that develops all throughout the womb, and even after birth, your personhood develops. And so he wasn't willing to put a demarcation anywhere in there.
I think that that's probably like what our theism, is. I mean, we think that we do develop over time also, but I think that you're a person right from the very beginning.
Or does it mean the ability to have emotions? Does it mean you have self-awareness?
Right. Self-awareness was one of the
I think personality is
definitions
part
for
of it.
personhood.
So I
But
think
again, it goes back to, if someone is, on life support, is someone who, because they don't have, the mental cognitive development, but yet they still eat, they still drink, they still can walk around. I don't think any of us here in this room would feel comfortable,
No.
And,
that person on the chopping block, so to speak.
right.
So,
And I think that's the
on the
main
bench.
argument too, is that, so what is that connector? Is that human nature? Because there are some humans, like you say, will have decreased. I think one of the thoughts was, if you weren't aware, like, well, what happens when you're sleeping? Then are you no longer a person? So there was those kind of comments like that.
So Kirk and I were chatting a little bit during your talk, Belinda,
Yeah.
about being human, being different from being a person. And to me, it's like, no, you're a person all along.
Well,
You could,
yeah.
Sorry, let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I am saying, Kirk was saying that you become a person after being born, and as you
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, then
You're putting words in my mouth.
then that's what I misunderstood. Anyway,
Wow.
but to me, you are a person all along. Yes, you see, I mean, newborns are definitely persons, but they kind of, little ones, when they're around 4 months, they're like so cute. They kind of become more of who they are. But I have heard, about just personality showing up in the womb. Just very active kids who are already super active in the womb.
Yeah.
And I've also read about embryos reacting to emotional situations while in the womb.
I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I read this guy's paper, but this was a theist, a good Christian thinker. And I think he was arguing that, the fertilized zygote, the single-celled zygote, is not yet a person. It's human, but has no personality yet. So in that sense, it's not yet a person. And that personality develops in the womb. But I wish I had his paper to read through and
Well,
look.
that makes sense, right? People with that particular line of thought would say the zygote can't express will, right? Or determination or emotion, right? And so I think this is where, the syllogism that I think Belinda's putting forth is, I think, so powerful because it's talking about the nature or the ontology of
Yeah.
the zygote, right? So if we can
Yeah.
establish the humanity of that, and it's
Yep.
something to be protected, then that would be fine. The only downside, the drawback that potentially that I've can kind of see is that if the DNA is then fundamentally what makes you and should be protected, I'm not sure what the reaction would be to like a nonsensical response, which is something like, well, then you should protect your toenail clippings and your hair follicles because they're also, they still got your full DNA, right? And so I can kind of see this potential back and forth.
That's actually not a good analogy, John, because the other than having the DNA, there's no way that a fingernail is going to be able to create itself into a body, whereas the zygote can.
Right, understood.
This is the
so then
first time
clearly we'd have to put more qualifications beyond just the DNA. But that's exactly what the viability camp wants to do. That's exactly what they're going to also argue is
well,
that
yeah, I mean,
we agree, right? It's like
everybody.
toenail, they
I mean,
have the
the argument.
DNA, but there are more things that are required. So I'm not disagreeing. I'm just kind of like playing this discussion right in my head, right? How this would kind of play back and forth.
Yeah. I want to just comment that I really appreciate the syllogism, the logic of going back to the zygote. I'm used to thinking of, well, maybe 6 weeks or 15 weeks, or that we have different states that are now saying, well, you can't abort any child that's over 6 weeks, or others that are saying it's got to be at least 15 or less than 15 weeks. And but this taking it back to the zygote, I think that there's a really strong argument for it, and which you made, I think, and that so I really appreciate that. But one thing that I'm wondering about, because there's so many other aspects to this question, and one in particular that I'm thinking of is the mother, and how, I'm thinking of a range of mothers that, that the young woman, before she's ever had intercourse with someone and had a problem with it, may think, well, all these right to life things, I can really appreciate that. And it's my body up to, I should have right to whatever but then after they actually get pregnant and maybe have an abortion, what about then? Because you hear of so many women that have the abortion and then are plagued with guilt,
Yeah, I think I've also been looking at the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs versus the American College of OBGYNs. So in regards to the APLOG, they have put down quite a few not side effects, but there's risks involved, post-abortion risks, mental health risks are pretty high, and also their uterus, if it could have been damaged, and so when they have their next pregnancy, they have a increased risk of preterm labor, not necessarily infertility, but preterm labor. So So definitely we have to be aware of that so that when we're taking care of them later, they need to let us know if they have had abortions or how many abortions they've had. The risk of having later term abortions also increase risk of complications and such. I think for me, from the medical background, I was very interested as I listen, just in terms of like what is the definition of abortion? I kept it pretty simple, that's the intentional killing of an innocent human being. But so actually, how words matter and their definitions. So ACOG is the more they are definitely pro-abortion. So they like move towards abortion. And so they're redefining, what abortion is. So when you say, like healthcare, what's healthcare? So kind of redefining what healthcare is. And healthcare is supposed to be the maintenance of health. Healthcare is not in inducing death. It's not in the, that's not part of the normal definite or the usual definition of it. And even when you define abortion, APLOG will say it's the deliberate termination of a pregnancy with the intent to cause the death of the embryo or fetus, where they have a dual patient model, so they look at both the mother and the fetus as their patients, so they're taking care of both of them. And then the ACOG is more of a single patient, mother focused. And so they define it as a medical procedure that ends a pregnancy. That's considered a safe, legal, and personal decision made by the patient, the pregnant individual. So so that's very interesting about how they're defining abortion. So when you're starting to hear about miscarriages, and not those, they're not able to get their health care because they're having a miscarriage. There's like, what do you mean by that? No, OBGYNs know how to take care of miscarriages. So those were kind of some things that was of interest to me.
Along that line, so
Mhm.
situations where the mother's life is in danger, I'm thinking ectopic pregnancy,
Yes.
would that be then justified in terminating the fetus?
Okay, so here's the thing, is that so you can do, okay, ectopic pregnancy, that will lead to that fetus is not going to survive. Okay, where it just won't survive. And so there is the physician, we would need to take care of both patients, but the idea is that you're trying to save the mother and both patients. You're not going to be able to save that fetus, okay, because the fetus is gonna die. You can foresee that the fetus is gonna die, but your intent is not to kill the fetus. Okay, so abortion is the intent of killing the fetus before the fetus is born. Okay, so that's what abortion is.
But-
You have the intent to kill the fetus.
Right.
Now, say for instance, in a
Would you have to kill the fetus in an ectopic pregnancy before it dies on its own in order to protect the mother?
you would have to do the surgical procedure to remove the fetus from that, because if it was allowed to grow, it would, burst the fallopian tube or something like that. Yeah.
Right. So then
So
would
that though
that
is
be a
considered medical care.
safety? Yeah, would that be then considered some sort of safety, basically removing the innocent on there and saying that now the fetus is a threat to the mother? Would that be a way of dealing with that, putting that into your syllogism?
I think, again, it's not intentionally killing that fetus. I don't think that, you're working to save, if you could save the fetus, you would be trying to. But
Yes.
it's
But it
a,
is- but it is
impossible
intentionally-
situation.
But
It's
it
not
is
practical.
intentionally killing the fetus, intentionally killing the fetus earlier than it would have died normally. So I
Well,
think.
no, I mean,
something has to
like
be fixed
in
the
an
syllogism.
ectopic pregnancy, you don't think that you're killing the fetus. I mean, the fetus is gonna die.
Well, but you're killing it earlier, intentionally.
You're, okay,
So I think
You're
I mean,
saving, you're
I-
saving the mother.
I mean, yeah, but
Yeah.
you have two patients there, so
Yeah,
you need
and I
to
think-
be able to save the woman.
I think it's the right thing to do, but I think there's something that needs to be reworded in the syllogism or an exception made or
Mhm.
something to make it
Well,
work.
that's what I was saying. Maybe that's where the fetus is no longer an innocent in that it is a threat to the life of the mother.
Oh, that's a
Make-
good question.
Yeah.
I guess just like, it was more for me like in terms of like healthcare. I mean, that's like normal healthcare that we would provide. So,
Yeah.
Or whatever.
I think a good, maybe
Perhaps-
Belinda, a good way to think about it is sort of the firefighter in a burning building analogy.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
trying to save the mother and the child, but they can't save both, And so with the atopic pregnancy, it's sort of like that. If you can save one, that's a win, and you're doing everything to preserve life, but your choices are constrained.
We used to call
for
that lifeboat ethics, where there's a life raft that they can only hold so many
Exactly.
people. There's still people drowning. You're going to sink if you try to save everybody. So
Yeah.
Yep.
For whatever it's worth, I literally have a friend. She's in heaven now. She is one of the most beautiful people I knew, one of the loveliest human beings. She was a doctor. She got married. She got pregnant, and I don't think it was an ectopic pregnancy. I think
No.
it was a high blood pressure or something.
Mm,
She
mhm.
knew she might die. She chose
Mhm.
not to abort, and it is a huge sadness. They both died. And so my beautiful friend Naira died in her, I don't know, early 30s, and the
Mhm.
baby, because she did not want to abort. I wasn't taught, she was in a different state. I wasn't near to connect, but I know of someone who chose to honor that to her death.
When I'm sorry about your loss there. When I'm reading, getting a little bit more familiar with the they call it life affirming healthcare of these OBGYNs, in the sense that when they're in that kind of situation where there's a medical problem like that, that we would there are ways to be able to take care of the mom and the fetus, and try to get them as close to viability, to be able to treat the hypertension in her situation, and then to treat the hypertension, but to also try to get the baby up to a viable point. But yeah, that hypertension again is I would think that if they had discussions, and I won't speculate, but I'm just saying that sometimes what can happen is the physician-patient relationship would be like, what do you want? And if you want life affirming, then what are the options available? Just like you would with cancer, what are the options available? What are the risks? And then let's work together to get it as far as possible. And then when when it is not possible anymore, then have that discussion again. And they would not really say that that would be an abortion, because in that situation, what I'm understanding is that they would do what they would normally do at that stage of how they would deliver the baby. Okay, so the baby would be delivered, not killed, but delivered live, and then possibly at least the mom would be able to hold the baby, and the family would be able to hold the baby. Now, if the baby dies in utero, like normally, okay, not normally, but dies in utero, then that is not considered an abortion when you deliver and remove that baby. But the other thing the life-affirming OBGYNs will do is they won't do a dismemberment. They'll deliver the baby whole.
There's one question that I have to ask, and that's kind of, I don't think it's been brought up to this point. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Randy.
And it's kind of akin, it's kind of analogous to showing pictures of dead fetuses. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual abuse in the world is so common. It is so common. And you see, well, just throughout my life, I've known a number of women who have experienced rape, who have been molested as children, who've undergone just god-awful things.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very immoral things.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's biological father impregnates their, let's say, 14-year-old daughter, what's the moral thing to do there? How do you answer that? It's this horrible immoral act, the suffering that you put on, everyone involved, especially the child. Are you going to force her because it's the moral thing to do to carry this child that could even well be deformed because of being so close and genetically? Are you going to force that?
Well, even if the child is not deformed, I think it's a great question.
Yeah, of course it is. But I'm just saying it's a horrible thing, and I've seen how it affects people's lives. I've had people very close to me who.
I don't have any personal observations, but this one that we heard within the last week or so, the 10-year-old girl that got pregnant through a rape. What do we do in her case? It's not, I don't even think it was her father or anybody was related to her, but it was, an evil thing. And how do we handle stuff like that? I don't know. I wouldn't expect you to have an answer to that,
but isn't that
Belinda, but if you do, I'd love to hear it.
Isn't it immoral to force somebody to go through that? Isn't that in its own immorality?
So maybe let's not focus on the forcing aspect. So here's a thought. And again, everybody's gonna have their own conviction, but of course it's a very tragic thing. So the way I've always kind of thought about it was this person A doing violence to person B. And so then the debate we're having, again, kind of the two premises that Belinda was showing still hold true. So we're talking about the life of person C. Does person C's life diminish because of some violence that person A did to person B? Right. That's really the question. So again, I'm not putting this down. I'm not saying that and that's why I wanted to get kind of away from, being forced to carry the child to term. I think I just wanted to focus on the thought of the righteousness of still carrying something. Person C is still innocent. Right? It's A doing violence to B, and so in a sense, nothing's really changed about the sanctity of life. And again, many people, Christians or not, are going to have different views running this entire gamut. Just like our sister's friend, right, made the decision to go to term with their child, and then they, giving up both of their lives in the same thing. Totally get that. Just like many believer and non-believer, right, have held to pacifist positions and have lost their lives with the enemy at the front, front door, when they could have taken maybe a self-defense position. So you're gonna have folks that run the gamut of that. But again, I still fundamentally, person A did violence to person B, and so we're talking about an innocent C that it's a tough decision. It's a tough situation, but it still doesn't, I think, materially impact the syllogism. That's where we want to go.
Go ahead,
Definitely not black
Sabina.
and white.
Unless Belinda wants to talk about that.
No, I think Sabina had
Sabina has a
wanted to
question, yeah.
comment.
Or a comment.
So actually, it's a book I read, and I was just trying to look through my long list of checked out books. It was a book written by a Christian person, and I think it may have been something called 10 questions that Christians like don't want to be asked, and one was about abortion. I think it was there. I'll have to look, and if people are interested, I will definitely I hope find it. Anyway, it's a devastating question, Randy, and a devastating situation. And by the way, as an aside, I saw something, some headline on Apple News saying, DNA testing is showing the prevalence of incest. But okay, so two aspects of what I was reading in this book. It was saying, just why are Christians so hung up on don't abort? And I think it was one of the things they were saying was one time the parent, this father was driving, and there was a box on the road, and it was just a little box, not a big deal, but he stopped and looked, and there was a child playing peekaboo in it. He could almost have, like, the box was in the road. And the idea that I was reading, it was very well posited. And Randy, it is not minimizing the devastation of what can happen. But their point is, if there's any likelihood that there could be a human being there, the person writing was making this metaphor. If you are just going about your life and someone entrusts a child to you, you do not have to raise that child, but you do have to keep it safe until you can pass it on to someone who will. So it was, I just think it would be devastating, to think, first of all, I was raped, and now I have to keep this baby. But they were making the point about if there is any chance there may be a child, there may be a person in this box, stop and keep it until you can pass it on to someone else. Oh, and I think it was in the same book, and I'm getting goosebumps, where they were saying, or someone else was just saying their wife was the result of a rape.
Mm.
Well, I could also tell you just the opposite stories, though, too, Sabina.
Oh, what? Go ahead.
There are opposite stories to that, too. Suicide, for one. Suicide for being forced to carry a child. And, this is why it's such a gray area. It's questions like this. It's situations. Everybody's different. Some people can handle it. Some people cannot. But I just see it as a different version of the lifeboat. Something that has never experienced sunshine, somebody that has a person that has never experienced life outside the womb versus a number of people outside the womb who are suffering already tremendously, especially the mother. So the mother goes, if the mother goes and is forced to have the child and gives it up, and then all the pain that's in suicide, the suffering involved in that. Where's the morality in that? So I look at it as the same analogy as lifeboat ethics. The same analogy is that, there is no easy solution here. A decision has to be made. Do we save one or the other? And I know it's not exactly the same, but from an emotional, from a quality of life standpoint, it is the same. And the person who has never experienced anything like self-awareness, a hike on a trail, on a mountain pass, an entity that has never experienced the beauty of life has a lot less to lose than somebody who has.
Well, how do you know that? I mean, like, who
We
knows what's
don't.
going on? I mean,
That's what makes it gray. That's what.
yeah,
everybody-
but I'm saying,
That's
yeah,
why
it
it
does
is
make it gray.
choice.
So I guess, but I just kind of
But
see
that
that
is an
struggle.
argument for choice. That's
I
what I'm
see
saying.
that struggle because I know also, people who have abortions, also, even from rape, who's to say that once they have the abortion, that they don't have those same, depression and
I had a
which
philosophy
I'm pretty
professor.
sure that, there's data for that too.
I had a philosophy professor who, whenever I would say, "Who's to say," he would always slap me. He would always.
Well, then you're well trained.
You can come
You're
up
well
with
trained.
a "who's to say" all the time, and that's one of the pitfalls of ethics in arguing it. But
Yeah. So it kind of
but
seems
but that's why
hard to move forward.
that's why situations are different. That's why you can't, when to say that this is morality and that we shouldn't do this because of morality. Well, we're talking about a lot of different levels of morality here that are in play and that are conflicting with each other. So, then it becomes who should stay in the lifeboat. The person who has never seen the light of day, it's not an easy question. I don't want to make that determination.
But earlier you were
But
saying,
if it
I'm
was
sorry,
my
earlier,
wife,
oh,
sorry, if it was my wife and it was an unborn child, I want my wife. I want my wife.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a little bit too emotional on this question.
Oh, no, that's, they're having some,
This is an emotional issue.
It's a
It is.
super hard, those are super hard questions, Randy. You're absolutely right. I'm
Right.
just saying there are some people who have chosen to do that. Anyway,
And
oops, sorry.
Well,
And
I'm going to,
The key thing is they had the choice.
yeah, these
I'm-
ethics questions are tough. I remember taking an ethics course in seminary, and Scott Ray was the author of the book. It was a very good book.
who's
But
talking?
Kirk. He
Oh, Kirk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
Scott Ray had you go through and look at all the biblical principles, and a lot of times you have conflicting principles, and then you got to weigh them and say which one is dominant here. And it's always tough in the real world.
It is.
Yeah, and if you're gonna say, okay, if there's a chance for suicide, then, and I know this is not what you're saying, but let's just say if it was a chance for suicide, do we say, okay, well, let's opt for preventing that? But there's so many things that people can potentially commit suicide over, even just being laid off from work when you just simply can't pay your workforce anymore and you got to cut your budget. There are people who commit suicide from that. Should that be illegal? It's tough, right? It's like if you're going to try and build a principle around something, it spiders into so many other areas that you need to figure out what is really the primary principle to base decisions on. And I think from a Christian perspective, we're looking at life. But yeah, there's not just one life involved, right? So we understand it's not easy one to answer.
well, I'm going to stop this conversation at this point. Belinda, I thank you very much for this very thought-provoking presentation you've made. And obviously it's affected all of us, and I really appreciate it. It gives some areas of deep thought and prayerful thought. Let me close this meeting with a word of prayer, and then we'll. Oh, Karen, were you going to say something, or?
Well, John Woo wanted to say something. You've changed your mind.
Oh, John, why don't you go ahead?
He's
No, no, I
muted.
was just doing a reaction. I was just clapping.
Okay.
and
All right.
thumbs up.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, let me just close this with a word of prayer, and we'll stick around for a little bit. But gracious Lord God, we just thank you for this thought-provoking presentation that Belinda has given us, and help us to internalize these ideas and these thoughts, and guide us as we try to come to conclusions on these very difficult issues of where we're choosing difficult questions, where we're trying to sort out issues that are very complex. Please give us wisdom, give us insights, and we just praise you, Lord, for the miraculous creation that you've placed us in, and the amazing your amazing grace that you have given us, and your mercy, and that you have given us the path to salvation and the path to heaven. We just can't thank you enough, Lord, and we praise you and worship you and ask you to go with us now as we go on to our different tasks and issues, and just we just praise you and ask you to bless this time, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.